Hey everybody, sorry about that interruption. I believe the music hold has ended. Chrissy, if you're on the line and you can hear me, can you take yourself off mute just to confirm folks can hear me?
I am on the line.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. We'll continue with our introduction. So again, if you want to ask a question, please include your first and last name, a phone number to reach you, and your hometown so we can get back to you. For the host herself, Chrissy Houlihan is an Air Force veteran, an engineer, entrepreneur, an educator, and a nonprofit leader. She represents Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District, which encompasses Chester County and the southern portion of Berks County, including the city of Reading. She serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. If you are interested in learning more about her, head to houlihan.house.gov. Our agenda this evening includes opening remarks from Chrissy. Then Chrissy is going to introduce our special guests and ask opening questions. And afterwards, we will move to our live question and answer period, including online questions. If you have a question for Chrissy that is outside the scope of tonight's town hall topic, you can contact our office at houlihan.house.gov or call any one of our offices. With that, I'm extremely proud to introduce our United States Representative, Chrissy Houlihan.
Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you so much for putting up with the technical difficulty. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent, and welcome again, everyone, to this, our 85th Town Hall. For those of you who have attended one of my town halls before, either maybe in person or perhaps over the phone, I'm really glad to have you back. But if this is your first time joining us, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with our team and with our awesome panelists this evening. As Aubrey mentioned in the introduction, I'm an engineer by background, an industrial engineer, in fact, and so I really am not kidding when I say that I love processes and efficient systems. In fact, I spent a lot of my days during my career in the private sector in warehouses trying to figure out how to tackle supply chain issues and in logistics supply chains and a number of other places. I also happen to be the daughter and the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and they came to this country from war-torn Poland right after the war with almost nothing. And my dad arrived here in New York, actually, when he was just a young kid. And he learned English and received a terrific education and then went on to serve more than 20 years in the Navy, where he met my mother and had me, of course. So I followed in his footsteps, literally a lot, moving dozens and dozens of times, it felt, before graduating high school. And I also joined the military just like he did. And so now, a generation later, I stand here as the first woman who's ever represented Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District. And I share all of that because I truly want to make sure that you all know how I think about the issue of immigration, and that I think about it through a lot of different lenses. Not only the lenses of my personal background, but also, of course, the lens of our community as well. In our congressional district, our community is home to a vibrant immigrant community. It has Kennett Square, and we are, of course, proudly the mushroom capital of the world. We have Reading, Pennsylvania's 4th largest city, with the highest percentage of Latinos in any municipality in the Commonwealth at nearly 70%, which is really why sometimes I'm saddened when I turn on the TV and I see far too many Americans who vilify one another over the issues of immigration and over the important issue of border security as well. Listen, I really, really get it. I really get that our system is broken, and Americans are angry and they're frustrated and they're heartbroken about what's happening at our southern border, and I am as well. I had the opportunity to visit our southern border, first in Brownsville, Texas in 2019, and again just a month or so ago in El Paso, Texas as well. While I do believe that our immigration system and our system is broken, I also do believe that it can be repaired. In fact, since my first visit, I see some of the work that has been done, and I know that there is more to do with enhanced processes, more staffing, and better systems as well. In the government funding package that we just passed a few weeks ago, bipartisanly, of course, that went back to the Senate and then to the President's desk for signature, we allocated historic levels of funding to help secure our southern border. And you can find a long list of the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill provisions on my website under press releases, but really quickly I'll highlight just a few of the things that were included in that Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that was passed a couple weeks ago. First, we allocated $495 million to fund a record number of 22,000 Border Patrol agents. We also provided $125 million for increases to Border Patrol overtime pay, which were authorized by the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. Also included were $20 million for an additional 150 CBP officers who support the counter-fentanyl efforts, and $283.5 million for border security technology to secure our border. And finally, this just not a complete list, but a short list, $650 million for the Shelter and Services Grant Program, which would provide funding to nonprofits and NGOs as they're assisting migrants who are awaiting the outcome of their immigration proceedings. And again, these just name a few, and I would encourage you to look at the rest on our website. More importantly, though, what has not improved is the volume of the people who are seeking a better life in our vibrant and healthy economy. We don't need more of the same expensive Band-Aids, but rather we really need real reform with more legal pathways to come here and to participate in our nation's next 250 years. So to that end, I'm really committed to bipartisan work to secure our border, and I'm asking the same of us here in Congress. The House is currently under, as we all probably know, Republican leadership, and I've asked for, and I will continue to ask, our leadership, the leadership, to bring bipartisan immigration reform bills like the Dignity Act that I am a co-sponsor of to the floor for a vote now, and we'll talk more about that during the conversation. We really have to reach a compromise with real solutions, and we need to do this right now for this very complex issue. So I'm calling on and have called on Speaker Johnson to please change his recently stated position that, quote, now is not the time, end quote, for immigration reform. I couldn't disagree more. In fact, I believe that most people in communities like ours and across America couldn't disagree more either. We know that no solution will be perfect and that no solution will satisfy everyone, but we really can't have that keep us from making the progress that both the American people and those who seek refuge here need and deserve. So at this time, I have the great opportunity to transition to our panel introductions and opening questions. And for those of you who are joining perhaps a town hall who've never participated before, whether in person or on phone, we try to focus our conversation as we are here on one single topic, and we try to bring experts into the conversation where we are able to try to contribute to the richness of the conversation with their expertise. So I'll be beginning with Mark Delic, who's the Vice President of Government Relations at the bipartisan immigration advocacy organization called Forward US. Thank you so much for joining us. And Mark is the leader, and was the lead negotiator for Senator McCain. And Mark, as that lead negotiator, you worked on the bipartisan immigration reform bill, and that bill passed the Senate in 2013, which was the last time we were pretty close to getting something done. But the House of Representatives under Speaker Boehner at the time didn't bring the vote to the floor of the House, so it was never signed into law. So I was hoping, Mark, if you could briefly introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about what were the barriers to passing that comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It is very nice to be here talking with you and folks from your district. I currently work for US. Previously, as you mentioned, I worked for Senator John McCain from Arizona. I'm also from Arizona. I grew up in Tucson, which is in the southern part of the state, about 50 miles from the border, 75 miles from the border. And, immigration was kind of day in, day out part of life in Arizona, and both, growing up there and then working for the senator, spending time on and around the border. It's just a radical life. Like a big part of trade from Mexico coming into the United States goes through Arizona, and it is part of the lifeblood of that economy and integral to how the state works. And really, as it is for the rest of the country. I had the opportunity while working for Senator McCain to participate in those 2013 debates. And I would say, now as opposed to then, and this as well as anyone, that it is very hard to pass anything through Congress, let alone kind of big, contentious legislation that has, very high public visibility with people with a lot of very strong opinions. And so, that's only gotten more challenging over the past 11 years, as we see through this, particularly in a tight Congress that we have now with very slim majorities. It's really hard to get anything done. But even in more I guess it's like normal times, one challenge we saw, in that 2013 experience was, there's Republicans employ something called the Hasek rule, a majority of the majority. That always makes things difficult to pass if you have to get the majority of one party to move a bill forward. Not to get into the specifics of the kind of the mechanics of legislation, but I'd say there's kind of three big things that I would say make it challenging to pass immigration reform. One, again, like Congress, is just very hard now. There's a limit of amendments on the Senate side. The process through the House has not gotten easier, particularly with the slim majorities. I think two, the border has always been, I think when people think about immigration reform and comprehensive immigration reform, they think of two things. They think of border security and what's happening on the border, and they think of legalization. Both of those bring out a lot of emotions in people. But there's a lot of other parts of immigration reform that are needed and talked about. But that focus on the border in particular, I think, is something that makes it difficult for members to engage. If they don't have time to spend on the border, they don't see what's happening, and they don't have kind of like a holistic response to it. They may find themselves in districts that don't have or don't see really the immediate benefits of immigration, and there's a focus, kind of a myopic focus on the border as opposed to the broader immigration system that hasn't been updated really since 1996. And then three, the kind of point is people benefit. America is extremely lucky, and we benefit from the benefits that immigration brings, but it's not always the thing that we see immediately. But if you look at the last inflation report, our ability to bring in people has helped our economy grow and help cool inflation. Immigrants, start, I think it's 25% of Fortune 500 companies are run by immigrants. Big business, small business, immigrants are and continue to be contributors, but people don't always look at that as a reason for supporting immigration. I would say, like polling-wise, when you look at the numbers, people both, support for immigration it kind of remains relatively high. Support for increased border security remains high, particularly now, but also support for, finding a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and other undocumented people remain high. And so there's always broad support for fixing it, but it's once we get to the actual like nitty-gritty details of in Congress and what that looks like, it becomes very, very challenging. And I'll just use an example, a recent example in the Senate. There's a bipartisan bill that's being negotiated. Senator Lankford, Senator Sinema, Senator Murphy spent a lot of time negotiating, and this wasn't even a sense of comprehensive immigration reform bill. This was very focused on border and asylum reforms, with some pretty, modest reforms that things within our employment and other parts of the immigration system. And, the reception that Senator Lankford got was not, hugs and roses from people from his party or outside. And I think that dynamic of any time you engage in a bipartisan effort and look for compromise, which just has to be, this is a compromise and kind of a three-pillar compromise often between border security and security, economic, visa or employment visa improvements, and legalization requires compromise. If you get beat up over it time and time again, other members see those signals and find less reason to engage, particularly when voters in their district may not be their top issue for them. And so we always run into those challenges. I think part of, my job, I'll say, is to help both educate members and their staffs and also and help lead them to constructive avenues so that when maybe the numbers line up better and there is an opportunity for reform, we can get there.
Thanks. And, you're describing kind of a day in the life of Congress right now. It is very, very complicated, and this is one of the hardest ones to figure out. And I think we did come pretty darn close with the effort that you were talking about with Senator Lankford et al. And I was very frustrated because I do think, to your point about, sometimes we can't hope for the majority of the majority as an example, but we still have enough on both sides, so to speak, to be able to make some really serious compromise and some really serious progress on the things that matter to us all. And I share with you that the feeling that our community very much understands this issue, and that it's complex, and still at the same time asks us, which is fair, to try to solve for that as well. And so thank you for that introductory question. We're going to turn now over to Violet. Violet, you're going to tell us hopefully a little bit about yourself, but Violet Emery is the Executive Director of Berks Latino Workforce Development Corporation. As you know, Berks, the lower part of Berks is part of the 6th Congressional District, and Berks Latino Workforce Development Corporation is also known in Reading as TechCentro. Violet, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the mission and goals for TechCentro Network, and why, if you wouldn't also give us a little insight into why is bilingual workforce development so essential to communities like ours, and what are the advantages to employers for hiring bilingual workers? And once again, thank you, Violet, for joining us.
Thank you, Representative Houlihan, for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Violet Emery, and I am the Executive Director at Berks Latino Workforce Development. Our focus is on providing workforce training to unemployed and underemployed residents of Berks County, of which is composed of 67% of the population being Latino. I want to start my response by sharing some information, just some statistics on the Latino population in the United States. First, I want to say nearly 80% of Latinos in the United States are U.S. citizens. There are approximately 800,000 immigrants who become citizens each year in the United States. An estimated 6 million U.S. citizen children have a parent who is undocumented. That number is huge, too high. On average, 1 million Hispanics turn 18 each year in the United States, becoming eligible to vote. The labor force participation rate of Latinos in the United States is 65.6%, among the highest of any race or ethnicity. And lastly, in 2024, it is projected that 1 in 5 workers in the United States will be Latino. With that said, workforce training is what we do here at TechCentro, and that is to empower workers and individuals that lead to long-term sustainability. We empower participants to enter high-demand fields and build long-term careers. These skills not only benefit individuals, but also contribute to a skilled workforce that drives economic growth and stability. When we talk about the importance and embracing bilingual workforce development, we acknowledge and celebrate the diversity of our communities. A bilingual workforce is not only a reflection of our community's diversity, but also a strategic asset for employers. In today's globalized economy, businesses that can effectively communicate and engage with diverse audiences have a competitive edge. Bilingual workers possess the linguistic and cultural competence to navigate multicultural environments. We also have to point out that bilingual employees often bring their unique perspectives and problem-solving skills to the table. Their ability to navigate between languages and cultures enables them to create creatively and adapt quickly to changing circumstances, which is essential in the workforce. In industries such as customer service, healthcare, and education, bilingual workers can provide invaluable support to clients, patients, and students who speak languages other than English. For employers, there's also another side to it. For employers, hiring bilingual workers also present tangible benefits in terms of improved customer satisfaction, increased productivity, and reduced language barriers in the workplace. Bilingual workforce development is not just a matter of linguistic proficiency, it's about embracing diversity and fostering inclusivity. And today, as we navigate this conversation and the complexities of immigration, policy, and debate, it's essential for all of us to recognize the humanity and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their immigration status. And I hope that we can work to strive to create inclusive and welcoming communities where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. That's our focus here at TechCentro. We want to continue that focus, and we want to continue to build a workforce that contributes to our communities.
Thank you, Violet. It's really lovely, and I know the work that you do is so important. I've enjoyed learning and getting to know the organization and our community over the last 5 or so years very much. And the vibrancy of all of our district is something that I brag about all the time when I'm down here in Washington. Before I introduce our final panelist, John, I want to make sure that listeners who are on the line know that we are going to move after John's initial question to our live question and answer part. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please make sure you dial *3. Again, that's *3. And without further ado, our final and third panelist is John Kaye, and he's the Vice President of Construction of Pickering Valley Landscape, which is a local business, and I've had the privilege of meeting with John on several occasions. John, it was very good to see you in our Westchester office just a few weeks ago, and thanks very much for joining us this evening. And I have a quick question for you. You, as you and I know, have been a very, very strong advocate for immigration reform for many years, and specifically for something called the H-2B visa program. If you wouldn't mind briefly explaining to our audience what an H-2B visa is and how your business and others like yours utilize it.
Sure. Thanks, Chrissy. As you're a third-generation immigrant from Poland, I'm a third-generation immigrant from Peru. So my grandfather came to New York City and was selling finished Panama hats to New York City boutiques. And in the 90s, out of college, I was in the Colorado market for many years, working alongside in the landscape hardscape industry, which is primarily a Latino workforce, alongside legal residents and citizens that became citizens through the '86 Amnesty Act. So back here in PA, the H-2B visa program is very popular, particularly in the Chester County and the District 6 and Berks County area. It was first introduced to us in this region actually by the regional ICE office. As we were growing in business, we have 30 year-round employees, and our business is seasonal. So it's a seasonal visa that expires after 9 months. We bring our workers in and from one of the approved countries, primarily for us, it's Mexico, for a 9-month period. And we're able to expand from 30 to 90 employees during the peak season. And how the program works in Chester County, there's over 50 companies that use 800 visas, and in southeastern PA alone, goes to about 150 companies needing about 2,000, using 2,000 visas, and throughout the state, up to 400 companies using 6,000 visas. And each seasonal visa supports up to 24,000 U.S. citizen jobs. And it's a government process that we go through. It goes through the Department of Labor first, and first we're required to offer these jobs to U.S. citizens that have interest in this seasonal job, and then we move on to Homeland Security. We go through an application process. They approve the visas, and finally through the Department of State, where our workers are vetted and interviewed, fingerprinted at times, and their names are checked in the database. Through COVID, they were required to have COVID shots prior to entry, and we fly them in and fly them out every year. And oftentimes there's a stigma that when a Latino is working on a landscape project that they're being underpaid, and our rates are actually set by the Department of Labor every year. And 10 years ago, when Walmart was promoting that they were going to $10 an hour, the fight for 15 was already over in our program. We were paying $15.21, and they're talking about going to $15 a year an hour this year at Walmart, and we're already at $18.71 an hour. So these workers come, they support the U.S. economy, they pay rent to U.S. landowners, they buy groceries, they purchase used cars and goods, and they do send some money home. But the one thing I really do want to point out, last year we had a $2.4 million payroll for our visa workers, and 15.3% of that goes back into the Social Security and Medicare fund. And I did the math here, and $367,000 from these visa workers is used to support up to 17 seniors making $1,800 a month in retirement for the year. So that's how this program works, and I'm happy to report that recently we were able to actually support 5 of our longtime visa workers that come and go home every year. It took 4 years, but we sponsored 5 deserving workers for permanent residency that are now here, able to live here year-round and sponsor their own families to eventually come to the U.S.
Thanks, John. Those are really helpful statistics to know about, and I know that I've been very appreciative of the education that you've provided me about your business and the many like it in our community. As we all know, Chester County and Berks County are really known for our beautiful open spaces, and we have an industry that relies a lot on agriculture, specialty crops, and landscaping, amongst other things. And there's a lot of different kinds of visas. And as you mentioned, many of the folks who take advantage of or avail themselves of them have the opportunity to be here and head on home. And many of them as well have the opportunity and the privilege as well, as you mentioned, to pay into Social Security and taxes and those sorts of things, which benefit us too. And with that, I think we're ready, if Aubrey is, to turn over to some questions from our audience.
Yes, and just as a reminder to press *3 if you have a question, and if you need to speak with someone in Spanish, marque estrella 3. And with that, we have quite a few more online questions than live questions, so we're going to start there with Donna from Landenberg. She called in and she wanted to know, what are we doing to support the leaders of other nations to alleviate chaos so that people don't have to leave? Donna says, I think most people don't want to leave their country. So, Chrissy, I will turn it over to you.
Sure, and I think it's a really interesting and important question. There really is quite a lot of conflict and chaos that is happening in many places around the world, and particularly our eyes are in the Northern Triangle, which is the area sort of south of Mexico, where many of the folks who are seeking good jobs and opportunity and some asylum are coming from. And so we do spend a lot of time here in Congress thinking about those issues. Particularly, there's an opportunity that I have to be on both the Armed Services Committee as well as on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Intelligence Committee to make sure that I am able to travel and build relationships. Bipartisanly, we travel to build relationships with some of the leaders around the world to try to understand their situation, how we can make sure that we are being helpful in providing policy and incentives as well. There is a important program that the administration has called America's Partnership for Economic Security, and that's a driving force of investment to help create jobs in the South and Central America. So we hope that helps people to not have to come, here. I would also say that I had a meeting just last week, actually, here in this office with a number of people from the apparel and footwear industry and trades, and they are working actively to make sure that they can think about that part of the world for some of their opportunities too. And so we want to make sure, to your point, that we are allowing for people to be able to stay in place where they are. I think that most people would prefer to be in a community that they're familiar with as well. And I think that if it's okay, I'd like to see if Mark wants to add to some of those ideas too, to see if there's other things that you could contribute here.
So I do not have the experience on the foreign policy side that I would want to contribute, but I would say, you mentioned this in your opening on finding additional legal pathways, and I agree that nobody makes the journey through the Darien Gap, and that it's being made by tens of thousands of people now, unless they absolutely have to leave. And so, one thing that we've been advocating for, we've been pushing for, some of which the Biden administration has done, is finding new legal pathways, whether it's through parole, or helping people to apply for through one of those legal pathways, expanding refugee programs, expanding H-2A programs, but things that people can apply for and utilize before they leave, or before they get to the border. That getting to the border as a last resort is really the worst option that we have, both in the kind of like chaos that it presents, and also it's a very difficult, dangerous, hard journey for those individuals. And so as we look to find how can we help create a system that allows people both creating those avenues and help people find those avenues that they can apply through these legal pathways before they get to the southwest border of the U.S.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I think it's complicated. The other thing that's interesting and adds another dimension to this is the climate itself, and if things are changing in terms of the availability of water or the temperature range that people are experiencing, it also is a driving factor in where people are seeking to try to find a better and healthier lifestyle. Let's go ahead and move to the next question, if it's okay.
Yeah, and this question, we'll get at a couple, but this one was specifically asked by Robert online. And Robert says, am I the only one concerned with the many who have illegally entered our country and the threat that they pose? Specifically, he wants to know about bills such as H.R. 2 that might have addressed this. Chrissy, I'll hand it over to you.
Sorry, I got to take myself off mute. Thank you, Robert, for this very important question. And as I hope that you heard in kind of my opening remarks, the system is broken 100%. And this concept of comprehensive immigration reform is one that has evaded us for a very long time, decades, in fact. And it's not a new debate. In fact, we talked about the bipartisan bills that passed the Senate. There was one in the 2013 range. There was one in the 2006 range. I think, frankly, we were pretty darn close to having one just a few months ago as well. And in both times, it has been the majority in the House, the Republicans in the House, that have killed the bills in some different ways. In the case of this one that we were just had the opportunity to vote on, it was killed between the Sunday night when it was introduced and Monday morning when we all woke up. So none of us had the opportunity, unfortunately, to be able to vote on what I believe would have been a huge relief for many in the country, as well as anybody who's kind of watching how we're evolving as a nation. The fundamentals of any of these bills, any of these ideas are the same. And Mark mentioned some of them. Invest in the border, invest in security. And remember, there's not just one border, there are many, and some of them are through the air and also through the sea and land. Making sure that we have immigration reform. Mark also mentioned this, making sure that we think about all of the people who are interested in coming here. The fact that our unemployment rate in our community is somewhere in the low threes is an indication that there's lots of opportunity, not just in our community, but all over the country to, take the interest that people have in coming here and match it up with a desire that we have to grow our economy. So what I would say is H.R. 2, the one that you're specifically talking about, was a piece of legislation that was a Republican-only piece of legislation. And it, as a result, it really didn't ever have the opportunity to stand on its own and get the votes that it needed. It had a few things in it that really I thought were not ideal or not optimal, which is one is that it removed the requirement that DHS transfer children to the custody of HHS within 72 hours. I think it's important that children, when they are in the system, are handled with a special care. And under this particular bill, the H.R. 2 bill, unfortunately, the Department of Homeland Security would have been able to maintain custody of minors for up to a month. And I felt like that was way, way too long. It also eliminated the requirement of a bilateral or a multilateral agreement for the removal of a person, not just kids, to another country or a safe third country. And so what that means is that the United States could, if that bill had passed, send deportees to countries that have not actually agreed to take those people without assurance of safe or viable pathway for them. And so for that reason as well, that was a troublesome thing to me with that bill particularly. And finally, it would limit or potentially eliminate the federal partnerships that already exist with nonprofit organizations and NGOs or non-governmental charities or organizations, because they were working or are working to serve immigrants and migrants at the border. So as an example, when I visited the border twice, each time I've been able to visit with charities, particularly Catholic charities. In the case of H.R. 2, this bill would have limited and potentially eliminated the partnership and funding for faith-based organizations such as the ones that I had visited with. So that's the reasons why I don't like H.R. 2, but I do like a bill that is somewhat similar but addresses some of those issues, and it is bipartisan, and so I would encourage you guys to take a look at this. That bill is called the Dignity Act. And the Dignity Act is a really good starting point because it provides even more money for CBP, the Border Patrol, than we already have just allocated, and even more money for the border infrastructure that needs, shoring up. It mandates that employers have to verify the immigration status of their workers, which I think is important, that they be part of the solution as well. It provides a path to citizenship for dreamers, which I think, as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, both with Violet and with Mark, is so critical. And I think that most of the American public supports that that's something that we need to address. And it establishes, as we were talking, paths to permanent residency for eligible individuals. And that, I think, is something that we need to acknowledge, is something that we, I think, as a collective are interested in. And it includes paying into a fund that would be able to provide training for U.S. workers as well. So I believe that this bill, the Dignity Act, again, a bipartisan piece of legislation, is an example of the kind of reform that we need to bring to the floor for a vote. I believe that, frankly, the legislation that was developed earlier bipartisanly on the Senate side is also an example of that reform that needs to happen. And we need to stop sort of demonizing these ideas that are bipartisan. You know, we need to live in the reality that our White House is Democrat, our House is a Republican controlled by a vote majority of one, and our Senate is democratically controlled by a vote majority of one. We need each other, and we know that there are right things to do, and then there are divisive things to do. If it's okay, I'd like to maybe turn it over to our panelists to see if you all have anything to contribute to that conversation about what good immigration reform bills look like.
Sure. This is Mark. I can jump in. And I think to, the question, the U.S., we should absolutely, know who comes in our country. We should expect our government to operate in a way that does control our border. I think when we look at programs or policies like Title 42 that was implemented during the COVID and continue with the Biden administration, what we often saw was that people were denied entry. They weren't allowed to apply for asylum, or they weren't processed through parole. What happened was they just evaded detection. And so you had people that were denied entry. And again, these are folks that have come a very long journey and sort of reverted to what was kind of prior between the ports of entry, illegal entry to the United States. We had no idea who folks were. As people, over the last couple of years, we've modified to both uphold our obligation to allow people to file an asylum that have a viable claim. That allows us to have a sense of know who those individuals are and then work with them as they process through the court system. And the same with parole. As people receive parole, we know who they are. In some of the parole programs, the CNHV parole program, they are sponsored by U.S. citizens who are then responsible for their financial welfare and well-being. We also, again, know who they are as they process through the court. So in the what do new pathways look like? Well, those new additional pathways, legal pathways, are preferred to something like a Title 42 or made in Mexico, because as much as we would like to, it's virtually impossible to meet the standard of operational control of the border, which would be zero illegal entries. We've spent $20 billion a year on border security, if not more now. We have 22,000 plus Border Patrol agents. They do a very good job. But for, we think it's more reasonable to find and work with individuals, particularly for those humanitarian obligations to fulfill, to work with them, know who they are, versus kind of reverting back to a enforcement-only posture.
Yeah. And John, would you be able to comment, if you are able to comment, on the Dignity Act and how it might affect your business? And I know we've also talked before about the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which is another piece of legislation that I'm really frustrated about because it has passed the House twice and not been taken up by the Senate. Is there a way that you could help us reflect on how any of those would help your particular business or those like you?
Sure. I think the Dignity Act is about 4 pages, and somewhere on page 4 it talks about the H-2B program and expanding it. We're stuck in 66,000 seasonal visas per year, and understand at the end of the worker's season it expires and they go home, and then they reset 66,000. Well, the GDP's grown, 300%. 3% a year in the last 30-some years, and that number should be around 200,000 visas available, and it remains at 66,000. So there are programs that work in the system that just need to be updated, and that's why we call in your office annually for the Band-Aid that we put on the program, and we get supplemental assistance here and there. And I think this year they're allowing up to $130,000 in, looking at some precedents that were set years ago. But I think the returning worker exemption in our program is in that Dignity Act, and what that does is it allows any worker that works any of the past 3 seasons to allow an exemption to allow the program to grow, but yet in a controlled manner, which is great. And if I could just briefly go back to the first question about how can we help people in their own countries stay in their own countries, in our program, we have a Northern Triangle initiative where 20,000 visas have been allotted the past few years for employment-based sponsorship in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, where many companies are bringing temporary workers in from those 3 countries, allowing them to economically benefit their families back at home, rather than, as Mark said, the worst-case scenario is that they arrive to the border, and that's how they want to enter. This way, they're flown in with dignity from their respective countries, it's paid for by employers, and they're flown home by the employers at the end of the season, and they're able to benefit a little bit from what the United States has to offer and help us with our economy at the same time.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And I remember some of the conversations that you had about some of the folks who come to work with you, of course, really want very much to just frankly be here, work, and sometimes go home. And I think that that's really something that is sometimes lost in the conversation as well. Aubrey, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do, and we have a few dozen, and so looking at some to answer a few in one, and one of those is going to be a live caller. So we have Miguel on the line, and Miguel, phone number ending in 7385. If you're there, your line is now live.
Yeah, Congress, thank you for your service, Christine. My question is, I make a petition for my brother like 24 years ago. Finally, the cases came, and the interview coming in Mexico this year, but they came 20 years ago, and one brother, another 60 years ago, and they came in illegally here. Now, I'm scared, and my brother is scared, like when they go to the interview, they get penalty because they came illegally here, when a lot of people cross the border right now and just ask for asylum and make it 2-3 questions simplest that they go into the country. Mm-hmm. When my brothers stay in line for 24 years, and that's the concern my brothers has, and I has too.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question. We hear this a lot from our community all the time, and there really is an issue right now where we need to make sure that as we started the conversation, that there are more and abundant pathways for legal immigration, and that people aren't stuck for years and years at a time, in some cases decades at a time, trying to await their turn. I've heard these stories at many of our town halls, and so here are some of the things that we can do. We can raise the cap on H-2B visas so that people, as we've talked about, like John, can have more people, more workers easily. We can make sure that we are, in the case of people with advanced STEM talent, we need very much in this nation. We can make sure that we have an opportunity for them to have an expedited or exempt status from the green card cap. We can frankly remove the per country caps, full stop, from employment-based green cards, so that we constantly run into certain countries that have limits assigned to them in terms of numbers of people who are allowed to be processed every year. And this is what also causes some of the really long lines. And we also, frankly, need to increase the funding that we have for our U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service to help to tackle the backlogs that you're talking about. And so, as an example, in this last round of funding that we were talking about, here's some of the data of what we did allocate for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So it's about $281 million that were allocated. some for $160 million roughly for refugee processing, asylum, work authorization, and backlog reduction, $10 million for the citizenship integration grant program, and then $111 million. We talked a little bit about the E-Verify program, which is something that I think is essential as part of the solution. So there's a lot that we can do and need to do, but it's just like everything else, it takes the will, it takes resources, and it takes us focusing on that issue. And I'm really, really grateful for your call, and I know that this is an issue that has been brought to me many times, and one that I am hopefully working on here in Washington. Violet, would you maybe have anything to add with that?
I was thinking about that situation because we've heard that story many times here at Tech Central. I would say a couple times a week we have individuals that are undocumented coming into our space looking for employment. And at that point, because of our funding restrictions, the employment piece is something that we can't help them with. One of the things that I would like to see is more nonprofit organizations having some funding or some resources to kind of guide individuals with this immigration situation, because internally it's huge. It's huge. Individuals just want to go to work to put food on their table, and we'll help them in other ways. If they want to learn English, they can learn English with us. But the employment piece is what they're really looking for. So our hands are tied. We feel, and if we could do something, we would. But at this point, it becomes a little tricky. So pathways, definitely pathways. There's a lot of individuals that have been in this country for many years and have contributed to the economy and started businesses and things like that. There's a large percentage of individuals that are struggling with, the immigration status. And it is a system, as you said, that needs some work. And hopefully, those individuals will get the assistance they need at one point.
Thanks, Violet. I appreciate your work. Let's go ahead and see if we've got other questions.
Yes.
Congresswoman, do you mind if
go right ahead.
I apologize. I apologize. I was going to say there are, it's limited, and obviously, for what the general is asking, it really requires congressional action. Right now, one thing we're working on at Ford US, and we have numbers for the 6th district. There's roughly 12,000 individuals living in your district that have the ability through executive action that the president has the authority, either through TPS expansion or parole in place. There's something called the caregiver rule, which would be cancellation of removal. So in case of like parole in place, there's roughly 4,000 individuals who are spouses of U.S. citizens. And if these are kind of administrative changes, we do the same thing for spouses of veterans, that if a veteran is married to someone that's undocumented, they can receive parole in place. That would in most cases waive the bars, particularly the bars are simply of inadmissibility. The inadmissibility bars for essentially overstaying their visa. That would allow them to be able to adjust status. And so, we've been asking on, working with the president to try to help make these happen. And it's limited. It requires congressional action for, the larger undocumented community to be able to move forward. Things like the Registry Act. The Registry Act has been around for 100 years, essentially, but it hasn't been updated. The date since the 1970s. And, it's a bill. I think the bill number is HR 1511. That would essentially say if you've lived here for an extended period of time, 20 years, 25 years, you can get in a process. People often say, why can't people get in line, or why don't they get in line? This would help create the line to help people allowed to get a green card. That would require congressional action being signed by the president. But there are things that President Biden can do now, and I think working with members of Congress to use his lawful executive authority to apply affirmative relief to a good number of people.
Awesome detail, and a lot of things for me to try to follow up on. Thank you. Let's see if we've got any other questions.
Thank you, Chrissy. There are a few folks who wrote in who are concerned about bad actors who take advantage of what's happening with regards to our broken immigration system. So addressing broadly, in addition to those who are coming here for economic opportunities, as we've talked about, there's also those bad actors who seek to do us harm, drug traffickers, human traffickers, and other criminals. What is being done to address crime and take on those criminals?
Also a good and important question, and one that I spend a lot of time focused on in my work on the Intelligence Committee. So I have, as I mentioned, 2 committee assignments. One is the Armed Services Committee, where I spend a great deal of time thinking about our men and women in uniform and making sure that we are able to keep them happy and safe as they complete missions for us. But I also work on the Intelligence Committee, and specifically within the Intelligence Committee, I have the ability to affect some change on some of the areas that you're talking about. As an example, I guess it was last Friday or Thursday, I introduced a piece of legislation called the Enhancing Intelligence Collection on Foreign Drug Traffickers Act, which is a mouthful, but I did this with Representative Dan Crenshaw and myself. This is a piece of legislation that was attached to or associated with the FISA reauthorization, and I know I'm throwing a lot of acronyms at you, but generally speaking, what this did was to allow the intelligence community to be able to target narco traffickers, in addition to all of the other kinds of message traffic of non-U.S. citizens not in the U.S. that we are allowed to track. This was expanding the ability for our intelligence organizations to be able to look into things that would maybe provide narcotics to our nation, illicit narcotics specifically. And so this would pave the way for the U.S. government to be able to seek information and create another certification and another way that we can focus on the international drug production or distribution and financing of things like fentanyl. And so this is just kind of one way that we can do that. Of course, additionally, we focus a lot on just keeping our own communities safe, regardless of who is interested in doing us harm, whether they're people who are coming from other places or people who are already in our communities. We have had the opportunity to deliver a lot of support to our local law enforcement agencies in the last several years in the form of what's called community project funding, which allows us to be able to direct resources to specific projects and programs in specific police departments, as an example, to help them with things like storing information that's coming from body cameras or those kinds of things. And so we take that concern very, very seriously. I know that it's something that's on people's minds, and one of the things that we have to do is invest further. And I hope that some of the things that we have been doing in the form of a lot of the recent appropriations that we've done. Would any of the panelists like to contribute to that question? All righty. I think we should move on.
Thank you, Chrissy. Next, we're going to go to a live caller, Fred from Westchester. If you're still with us, your line should now be live to ask your question.
Wait.
Hey, Fred, are you still with us?
I'm still with you now.
Oh, great. Okay, you're now live if you'd like to ask your question.
Okay, I've listened for a half an hour of all the things and how much millions and millions of dollars that you have spent. I try to write them down as quickly as possible, but you're not addressing the problem at the border. You said you had $490 million for 23 agents, $125 million for Overtown, $20 million for officers, $240 million for border security, technical security. You're not stopping the infiltration of immigrants. You're not doing it. You're talking around it, but you're not addressing the problem. Trump stopped it. Right now, you're talking to some 10 million immigrants coming in. We don't know who they are. We don't know how legal they are. We don't know what drugs they are, what diseases they're bringing in. I don't understand. You're throwing money to accommodate your followers, but you're not addressing the problem.
Thank you, Fred. in the interest of time, because we just have a few minutes left, I'm sure that Chrissy might want to address some of the numbers.
I would love to answer that question. Yeah, I would love to answer that question. And I honestly, genuinely appreciate you calling in and the question, because one thing I want us all to understand who are on this line is, hey, we all love this country, and we all want to see what's right for our country, and we all want to see people who are able to contribute and pursue the same kinds of opportunities that we all got, whether we're first generation or we just got here, or whether we've been here with the Mayflower, or frankly, if we were here when the Mayflower arrived already. There is only so much that can be done without resources, without money, without people who are working tirelessly at our borders. And I've had the opportunity to visit with a number of our Border Patrol and a number of the folks who are deeply, deeply engaged in homeland security issues. And this can't happen without those resources. And to be honest, I'm not certain that it's enough. When you talk about the actual dollar amount. And in fact, many of the proposals that we're looking at that have not made it across the finish line would add even more, and I'm in support of that. That being said, I know that there is some conversation about what is possible and not possible by an administration or by the executive branch itself. I think that there has been a lot of reporting going on that President Biden is looking into doing executive orders on the border, trying to focus on limiting where people are allowed to apply for asylum, as an example, as one of the maybe tools in his toolbox. Nothing, to my knowledge, has been publicly announced on that, but I definitely am anxious to see that proposal and to see what his ideas are and whether or not they're frankly in bounds for the executive branch, because I really genuinely think this is on us. It's on the Congress to get this, solved. There are also legal limits, frankly, on what President Biden can do by executive order. As an example, you mentioned the administration previous to the current one, frankly, broke some of those limits. For example, one of them, the Ninth Circuit, held that a policy known as Remain in Mexico actually violates the law. And so litigation is still ongoing, and still is ongoing when the Biden administration ended that program rather than appeal the decisions. And so I think that what we all have to focus on is we can't solve this by yelling at each other. We have to solve this by being civil to one another, by understanding the passion that we all have is a passion to make sure that our country thrives. And the last thing I will say in this conversation is I do believe that this is a responsibility of Congress to make sure that we're putting forward solutions. And frankly, Congress's solutions are the power of the purse. We control, what kinds of resources go and the kinds of ideas that are executed on, but we don't get to, get involved in the very small details as well. As we started the conversation, there was a piece of legislation that would have absolutely given the administration additional powers. The ones that you're talking about. It also happened to provide funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And if we're probably following the news here, that bill was negotiated by Lankford and Chris Murphy of Connecticut. And it, as I mentioned, sort of died on the vine before I think, frankly, any of us had the opportunity to read it. It was blown out of existence by, people who were not willing to even give it a chance, even though it took months and months and months. I want to turn it over to any of our panelists who'd like to maybe comment on that question. I really do, Fred, appreciate you. I'm so glad that you called in, and I appreciate the conversation. Okay, so I think, Aubrey, we're running out of time, and I think that what would you like us to do next?
Well, Chrissy, I will give it to you for closing remarks. I do just want to remind everybody on the call this evening that the recording of this telephone town hall will be posted on our website in the coming days. Should folks in your community, friends, family have not been able to attend and curious about the conversation this evening, and for those who RSVP'd, you will get that link sent directly to you. Related to that, there were a number of questions that we weren't able to get to tonight due to the number of questions that were submitted, and you will be followed up with in the coming days to answer your question. And with that, Chrissy, I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey, and really thank you to our entire team who's behind the scenes working this evening and staffing the call, and all of our constituents who have called in tonight. And I'm very, very grateful for each and every one of you, because these really are important conversations, and I really believe that we need to be having them, and that we need to be, as I mentioned, doing them in as much of a reflection of the values that we all have of patriotism and civility and decency. It's something that we try to practice every day, not only up in our community, but down here in Washington as well. We really do live in the greatest country in the world, and you're hearing the bells calling me to vote. As a veteran of our armed forces, I truly believe that. In fact, today I was standing at the Boeing facility kind of celebrating one of their most recent successes in helicopters in the Chinook, and was able to listen to the national anthem, and it really resonated with me what a fine nation we have. But I also believe that we have a responsibility to strive to make it a better place, a continued better place for all of us. So for very long, decades in fact, immigration, and maybe even centuries you could argue, has been one of the areas that our government as a whole has genuinely failed to act upon. And so I really want to make sure that you've heard loud and clear that I work hard to make sure that we're enacting bipartisan and meaningful changes to this system. And I really appreciate your time this evening to learn a little bit more about how I hope to do that, and who's involved in our community as well in this issue. I very much want to thank our panelists for joining us. I very much appreciate the insight that they provide. And as Congress continues to wrestle with this topic, I promise to keep in mind all of our callers and all of our community, and every one of the, frankly, 8,000 people who contact us each month on this issue and so many others. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and please be well.